When Yahweh made a covenant with Abraham, the patriarch and all the males of his household were required to be circumcised. You will circumcise the flesh of your foreskin, and that will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. After 8 days every male among you shall be circumcised from generation to generation, so that my covenant may be in your flesh as an everlasting covenant. Genesis 17:11-14. If this was not done, the guilty party was excluded from the people of Israel. Circumcision was thus intended to be a unique sign in the flesh, distinguishing Abraham's descendants from their neighbors. Some researchers believe that circumcision was practiced among royalty in Egypt, as evidenced by an ancient illustration, although this depiction may reflect more of a puberty rite than a religious circumcision. Precedent or unprecedented, what was the symbolism implicit in the requirement to mul, translated, circumcise, of Hebrew males? Nobody knows. The origin of the term is also inexplicable. Linguists who have looked for parallels in Akkadian or later Semitic languages have come up empty-handed. In any case, the famous pact with the people of Israel was only with the men of Israel, since it was not possible to circumcise women. Perhaps the answer to this enigma lies in the Sumerian origin of Abraham. If its meaning is sought there, the term assumes an astonishing significance, for mul was the Sumerian term for celestial body, a star or a planet. Thus, when Yahweh instructed Abraham to mulatto himself and the rest of the men in his house, he was telling him to put the sign of the stars on his flesh, an enduring symbol of a heavenly connection. Somehow, a badge, such as today's passport or identity card, to recognize those who did or did not belong to the people of Israel. Naturally, this form of identification was required for entry into the many Hebrew rituals, festivals, and celebrations of the time, so it is not hard to imagine the candidate lifting his robe to show his circumcised status. However, circumcision is never necessary, except for medical reasons. For example, if the foreskin is too tight and difficult to pull back over the head of the penis. This is called phimosis and is very common in boys during puberty. Today we know that it is not necessary to do it in most babies. It is better to leave the protection of the foreskin. This is the name given to the skin that covers the tip of the penis, and that is the one that is cut during the surgery, and thus avoid infections, accidents and/or complications or even problems during the sexual life of adults. If the foreskin is pulled tight and is forced over the head of the penis, there is a risk that it will get stuck there. This condition is called paraphimosis and usually requires urgent medical attention. Circumcision may also be performed for cosmetic, religious, or social reasons. This is called non-therapeutic or ritual circumcision. Circumcision is believed to help reduce the risk of sexually transmitted infections and cervical cancer in female partners. However, it is considered more important to have safe sex. But, here it is worth asking, had that God made a mistake in creating the first man, by making him imperfect? The history of circumcision has its origin in the dawn of civilization. According to a bas-relief on the Ankh-Mahor sarcophagus at Saqqara, it seems that the Egyptians were the first to remove the foreskin. It has been suggested that the Egyptians performed male circumcision as a ritual prior to entering the priesthood. What is less frequently discussed is the fact that, in this same illustration, far from participating voluntarily, at least one of the men is forcibly subdued. However, those who really made this practice its characteristic sign was, of course, the Jewish people. Slaves of the Egyptians for several centuries, the Hebrews acquired this practice from their sojourn in North Africa. The Jewish circumcision, called Berith Milah, covenant of the word, is one of the main rituals of Judaism, neither more nor less than the sign that identifies the pact that God made with Abraham and his descendants as the chosen people. It is so important that the day Abraham was circumcised, at the age of 99, is still remembered, along with his son Ishmael and 318 men of his clan. That day, called Yom Kippur or Day of Atonement, is simply the holiest and most solemn day of the entire year. The fact that it is related that the pact was with the people of Israel is striking, when in reality, and given that the women of Israel lacked any consideration, the mentioned pact was, in practice, with the men of Israel, exclusively. According to tradition, circumcision had the purpose of consecrating the life of each man to the Lord from birth and, of course, reminding him of this pact every day. Maimonides, a Jewish philosopher of the Renaissance, believed that he also had the secondary objective of reminding each man that the existence consecrated to God should be carried out day by day, affirming the supremacy of the spirit over the instincts and pleasures of the senses. According to him, he says, this is the only way to reach spiritual and material perfection, an indispensable condition to be able to study and understand the Torah. Ritual circumcision is performed in the morning, usually at home, by a mohel or other qualified male. If it takes place in the synagogue, the godfather keeps the child sitting on the chair of the prophet Elijah, called the Angel of the Covenant. It is an eminently religious act that includes 2 blessings, and it is in this ceremony that the child is also named. But circumcision did not suddenly disappear with the rise of Christianity. In fact, since the early Christians were of Jewish origin, circumcision remained part of the religious ritual for a time. It was not until about the year 50 that Paul of Tarsus declared in his letter to the Galatians, part of the New Testament, that circumcision was not necessary to be a Christian. In fact, it was considered that it could constitute an obstacle to mass conversion to Christianity. In Arabia, circumcision preceded Islam. One of the requirements of a religious nature was circumcision. It is mentioned in pre-Islamic poetry and in the Hadith, the word of the Prophet Muhammad. It should be noted, however, that in Islam circumcision is not mandated by the Quran. Likewise, circumcision is not a practice limited only to the Western world. For most African tribes, circumcision is a ceremony of initiation into masculinity. It is the sign of leaving childhood behind to become an adult. Circumcision is also practiced by various Aboriginal cultures in the Pacific Islands and in Oceania. In modern times, it was from the second half of the 19th century that circumcision entered the field of public health. Victorian doctors, eager to introduce it into everyday practice, looked for pseudo-anthropological reasons to explain the origins of the operation. Beyond the ritual, they suggested that circumcision had actually been used as a practice that promoted hygiene and health. By this time, circumcision had become a routine practice in the United States and was considered a kind of cure-all for a wide range of medical and social problems. In the 1870s, Louis Sayre, a prominent American orthopedic surgeon, claimed the success of circumcision in curing paralysis and femorotibial swelling, and in calming nervous irritability. For his part, Merrill Ricketts identified in 1894 an astonishing set of diseases that supposedly could be cured by circumcision: eczema, edema, elephantiasis, gangrene, tuberculosis, femorotibial inflammation, enuresis, general nervousness, seizures, and hysteroepilepsy. Today, circumcision has become fashionable, and a large number of men in Western societies are circumcised. However, the unproven rumor spread that the sensitivity of the sexual organ was much less than in those men who had not undergone surgery, and it has also been alleged that circumcision can reduce the risk of contracting sexually transmitted infections in males. However, few of these investigations consider elements as complex as the social environment, sexual behavior, or penile hygiene. But the situation is more complex. There are also activist groups that are against the custom of circumcising all babies, and even seek to make circumcision illegal for those under 18 years of age. It is obvious that much remains to be said on this subject. We just took the edge off a long and complex issue. What is clear is that circumcision is an act linked to deeply rooted beliefs and ideologies about the social order. It is not only a prevention technique, but a practice almost inevitably linked to the expression of power. Far from being a trivial or routine operation, it is an act with profound social connotations and long-lasting physical and psychological consequences. This has been another documentary from Esti Hayway to all of you.